Thank you everyone. This is our Life Among the Leaves presentation with a focus on invertebrates in the Southern Otways. So I'd firstly like to acknowledge the Gadigal people as the traditional owners of the land we're gathered on today, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So many invertebrates have important social, cultural and environmental benefits to First Nations people, and more specifically, butterflies and moths are an important food source. And this is depicted in an image here of an aggregation of bogong moths. So I'm here on behalf of TSC and the project manager, Georgie Custance, and I'm Molly Fisher, and I'll be presenting with Louisa Bartels. So if you don't know TSC, we're an independent non-for-profit organisation which was set up to help address the extinction crisis that we're currently experiencing. We work with communities to foster connections with the natural world, as well as undertaking on-the-ground actions and assessments, and we focus on the more forgotten species such as the invertebrates. So invertebrates are animals without a backbone, and they make up 95% of all species on Earth. They play vital roles in our ecosystems, and they can tell us a lot about the overall health of our ecosystems, and we can call these bioindicators. Little is being done to assess invertebrates, and they're often omitted from conservation efforts, despite them being relatively accessible and easy to assess. So I guess, is this a case of nobody cares or nobody sees? Often it can be really hard to appreciate and care for the things that we simply cannot see. So when we encourage and let people practice how and where to look for these smaller species, we can give people a deep insight into their local biodiversity. And this can seem really hard at first, but practice really does help. The project manager, Georgie Custance, was able to find these really small 1mm snails that we can see on the screen here just with a bit of practice. So we run 2 invertebrate projects in the Southern Otways, and they were both pilot studies that were focusing on trying to locate threatened species listed under the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act, like this 2-spotted grass skipper and this Erskine's pinwheel river snail. And the snail actually hadn't been found for 30 years until we had a young male ecologist from Tassie. He came down for one day and he found it, and that's simply because he knew how and where to look. I'll be talking to you today about butterflies, and Louisa will be presenting on the snails. So a bit about butterflies before we get started. Butterflies belong to 5 Lepidoptera families, which includes both butterflies and moths, and they provide vital ecosystem services such as pollination, and they're an important food source for birds and many other species. Areas rich in butterflies are often rich in other invertebrates too, so they can tell us a lot about the overall health of the ecosystem, like I mentioned earlier. Butterflies have interesting life cycles. Many butterflies have specific plant associations, which we call host plants. So the butterfly will come in, it will lay its eggs on the host plant, the caterpillar will emerge and consume that plant, and the caterpillar often really needs that host plant to complete the life cycle. The adult butterfly stage is what we call the flight period, and many butterflies fly at different times and different lengths of the year, and this is generally through the warmer months. During the flight time, adult butterflies will form a mating behaviour where they'll fly to the top of the nearest cliff or the nearest hill, and they will compete for territories. This is the males competing for territories, and the females will choose her mate based off the male who can hold the territory the best. So our main aims for the Coastal Butterfly Project were to assess butterfly communities in the Southern Otways using community education, baseline assessments, and the development of resources and skills. Now, these environments are really important for butterflies because they prefer the more open habitats. They're important areas for mating, and these coastal environments are really subject to urbanisation. So for our community education, we ran a butterfly workshop where we had over 35 people attend with only 4 days of notice, and people loved it so much that they're asking when the next one will be. We also put our articles in the local news sheet to give butterflies publicity and to encourage the community to put their sightings onto iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is an extremely valuable tool, and it has been to both of our projects. Anyone can upload their sightings, and these sightings get confirmed by community experts, and they're very useful for the more under-recorded species and in areas that are surveyed less. We also planted a butterfly garden, which demonstrates butterflies and their host plants in a well-used community space. And we put up informative signs to try and encourage the community to plant their own native species into their own gardens to encourage butterflies. So for our resource and skills development, we worked with the crew at the Southern Otway Landcare Network to create a list and a brochure of all the different plants that we can grow and purchase in the region. We also developed a flight time calendar which depicts when to look for which species. And we also have funding to finalise a Otways field guide, and we're currently working on that. So for our baseline assessments, it involved catching and releasing butterflies. This wasn't always easy, but it's a very fun activity. Our surveys consisted of 4 3-minute timed searches, and we would stop the timer whenever we saw, chased and photographed a butterfly. We conducted these surveys around coastal areas of Apollo Bay, the Otways, and with the addition of some more casual searches. So using a net is particularly useful to get confirmed IDs of the faster moving species, which are hard to photograph. So by catching them, we can put them into a container, make sure we get some really good photos and release them again, and that just increases the efficiency of our surveys. So our results, we found 6 species that hadn't been recorded in the Colac Otway Shire before, including this long-tailed pea blue, and this is actually quite a common migratory species, and the orange ochre. Overall, we had 136 community observations, which consisted of 26 different species. So when we look at this across different butterfly seasons, we can see that there was a dramatic increase from the season prior to the commencement of the project to the season after. It was about a 70% increase in the number of community observations. And when we look at this at the number of different butterfly species recorded, we can also see a dramatic increase after the commencement of the project. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll pass you over to Louisa. So thanks, Molly, for that. So my name's Louisa, and I'm going to be talking to you about the Searching for Our Lost Snails, the Great Otway Snail Blazer project. So the Otways is home to a diverse range of snail species, as snails do like wetter climates, and many of those species are actually endemic to the region. So this project was designed to search for our lost snails, and what we mean by lost is that there are a number of threatened species of pinwheel snails, as we have here, that are really tiny but have no recent records in the Southern Otways, but do have historical records. So we're trying to find out if they still persist in the region. But not all threatened snail species are really small. We have the Otway black snail, which is pictured here, which is endangered, but is found quite readily by the environment and has high recording on iNaturalist. So despite being quite easy to survey this species, there hasn't really been any regular population monitoring of them. So hopefully this project will start some long-term monitoring. And this is really important because they are a species that is potentially thought to be affected by climate change. So we want to see how they can adapt to that. So similar to the butterfly project that Molly talked about, one of the major aims of this project was building community awareness and engagement. We also aim to survey public and private land. And specifically with those private land assessments, we were hoping to inform and engage landholders on their land snail communities on their property, and then subsequently provide them with conservation advice, how they can protect and restore their communities and their habitat for snails on their property. And this is really helpful because it provides people with a sense of custodianship, so they want to help the snails on their property and create a snail diverse environment for them. So what do we do when we're trying to find these really hard snails? First, we call in the experts. So we had Dr. John Stanisic, who's also known as the Snail Whisperer, who came to run some expert workshops for us with the community, and he also helped us establish a method that we used when we conducted surveys. We also had Bruno Bell here, who is a knowledgeable malacologist who came up from Tasmania and was really good at helping us find those smaller snail species. So following on from the workshop, we had the first ever Great Otway Snail Blazer, which was a one-of-a-kind event. And this ran for about 3 months, and this was encouraging members of the community to go out in the environment, find snails, and then upload pictures to iNaturalist. During this time, we also ran volunteer-assisted surveys on public and private sites. So when we were doing these assessments, we were looking for habitat that's ideal for snails. So we use a timed active search looking around the base of trees, in rolled up bark, under logs, but always making sure that we were minimising disturbance as best we could. And then we also collected leaf litter and specimens to send up to the Australian Museum. With our leaf litters that we collected, we dried that out in the sun, then we sieved through them with geosieves, and then we manually sorted through to find these smaller species. So for example, we've got a really small snail shell that we found that we may have otherwise missed if we were just relying on the timed active search. We approached Southern Otway Landcare Network members to ask if they wanted their property surveyed, and we did have a really great response, and so we used that established method to conduct those surveys. We're now at the point in the project where we are formulating conservation advice. So this is sharing species profiles and survey results to landholders so that they can understand how they can best protect and restore habitat for snails on their property. And this is in the form of a letter of recommendation, as we have here. And so these examples of advice could be telling them to retain some fallen debris that could be habitat for snails, or suggesting lists for wet forest restoration. So here we have some of the results. We can see the implementation of the project, and this corresponded with a really high increase in the observation of land snails in the Southern Otways on iNaturalist. We had a similar trend here, but this is talking about the different land snail species. So again, since the project started, a really large increase afterwards. So the preliminary results from the project, we have found 5 undescribed species through our assessments and potentially 1 undescribed genus. Across all our assessments, we had the highest diversity at 3 private properties, including restored wet forest from about 40 years ago. And we found that the Otway black snail was about equally found at publicly and privately managed sites. So some future research from this project, we can see that there's still a lot of taxonomic work that needs to be done in the region for snails, particularly due to the high endemicism down here. And there is potential to expand the effort and surveys, particularly with the Otway black snail, as we talked about, could be a climate change affected species. So we have started some monitoring, which we hope to continue to see if any range contractions occur due to climate change. We also hope to incorporate any of our findings and knowledge into local restoration efforts. So something we want to investigate is if leaf litter translocations are something that we could do in conjunction with planting vegetation to restore an area. We also hope to show with this project that snails are a really useful conservation tool, and they can be really helpful in particular with wet forests and cool temperate rainforests to monitor their biodiversity. So often in these areas, there may be other challenges with survey methods. So it could be problems with accessibility, or it might be really difficult to see other fauna groups such as birds in the higher canopy. So in conclusion, hopefully we've shown today that invertebrates like snails and butterflies are a really useful but underutilised tool for conservation and can be used to inform decisions. So we can gain a huge amount of information from them quickly, cheaply and easily. All you really have to do is have the willingness to get down on your hands and knees or look and chase for butterflies. And invertebrates present a really unique opportunity to teach us about the subtleties of diversity by training us to look closely at the environment. So I'd like to thank, on behalf of TSC, the project partners and volunteers that were involved in all the funding bodies that made this project possible, so Coast Care Victoria and Landcare Victoria. So thank you for listening.